Hi, I'm John, and welcome to Dice Paper Miniatures, episode number 2. I'm really excited to be here today because I get to continue on getting back into the hobbies series. So, for today's episode, I'm going to talk about the games that have gotten me back into the hobby. So the games that have gotten me back into the hobby, no coincidence, are miniature-based tabletop war games. So about 2016, I had spent, about 5 years previous to that working on a card game called Battle for Solaria. You see it right there. And I really wanted to dive back into just painting miniatures. And so I started doing some research. And about 2016, I noticed that a new game had just kickstarted and was coming out called Guild Ball from Steamforge. And that game looked not only cool to me, but what really appealed to me were the quality of the miniatures and the fact that they seem like a miniature range that could be used not only for its game system, but also for other games, specifically role-playing, fantasy role-playing games. So I always like when miniatures can be used for other game systems. That's kind of a big sell for me when I get into collecting the miniatures. All right, so in addition to Guild Ball, coincidence? Maybe, but another sports ball game was Blood Bowl. Blood Bowl for me had been a game I played countless times in the 90s when I worked at a hobby game / comic book store. There was a huge player base for Blood Bowl back then. And then, of course, through the years, I've played it online. So I knew I wanted to get back into Blood Bowl. In fact, when I saw Guild Ball, that kind of instigated me to want to check out Blood Bowl. And it just happened to be that it was released, the third edition was released back in 2016 as well. Now, its miniatures don't really necessarily overlap into other game systems, but it's just such a cool game for me that didn't matter. I wanted to, start collecting teams again and start playing. And fortunately, my local hobby store, one of my local hobby stores has a very active Blood Bowl league. So they're pretty much playing, I want to say there's multiple seasons per year. So that's pretty cool. In addition to that, I also was looking into, I wanted to get into 40K, but I was a little intimidated by buying a huge army again and having that much of a commitment, which is in retrospect funny because even at the skirmish scale, you collect so many armies for the skirmish size games, you still have a bunch of miniatures to paint. But at the time, I was a little apprehensive to get into 40K. But Shadow War Armageddon had just been released, and that hit all my buttons, if you will, or checked all my check boxes, because it was 40K themed, but it was skirmish-based armies, and the rule set was very close to Necromunda, which similarly to Blood Bowl was another game that I played a lot in the 90s that I loved. So I was like, how could this game go wrong? It's Necromunda rules in the 40K setting. Perfect. Unfortunately, Games Workshop just kind of used that as a trial run for essentially 2 more skirmish games to come out shortly thereafter, which coincidentally was Necromunda. Ironically, it didn't have the same rule set as the previous Necromunda, but it's still a fun game, and the new models are amazing, of course. And then Kill Team, not really like Necromunda, not really like Shadow War Armageddon, but not bad either. In fact, a pretty solid game system. Arguably, the wound component of it is a little wonky. It is what it is, but you can use it in the 40K setting, and they're small armies, war bands, whatever, and that really appealed to me, to be able to only have to paint maybe 4 or 5 up to 8 to maybe 12 models, depending on your roster size. That really appealed to me. So for me, while it was a bummer that Shadow War Armageddon went away, Necromunda and Kill Team were really solid replacements or alternatives. And then in regards to those two games, another game from Games Workshop came out called Blackstone Fortress. While the game itself, I'm still kind of undecided if I like it. Like, it's a good game, but it's more of a board game to me than a miniature-based tabletop war game. But what's cool about it are those models can be used for Kill Team. So, you know, as far as liking game systems where the miniatures can be used for other game systems, that appealed to me, and that was a big enough of a sell for me to get into Blackstone Fortress. If anything, to get the miniatures to use in Kill Team. So, yeah, I got into Blackstone Fortress. Now, I want to say, trying to think here, after Blackstone Fortress, it's a little bit of a blur. There were a number of miniature / tabletop games that came out that I got really excited about. Vanguard, basically the skirmish-based game of Kings of War. So a fantasy-based tabletop skirmish game. The guys that were playing Blood Bowl kind of jumped on to that. So there was a fairly active Vanguard team. Basically, all these games right now are kind of on hiatus with the bug right now. But I've collected the Northern Alliance for that game, the Dwarves, and the Chaos Dwarves. I think it's Chaos Dwarves. So those three armies are what I've kind of collected for my my war bands for Vanguard. And then from Seamont, it's more of a board game, but the miniatures I couldn't pass up. That was for Hate. I love post-apocalyptic settings. That took it to an extreme. And being inspired by Adrian Smith art, whom I've loved since I was a kid, because he did a lot of the original artwork way back for the old, was it Realm of Chaos for, I think it was even for like Rogue Trader for 40K for Games Workshop back in the day. So I've always loved his work. So I really couldn't say no to that. I haven't done much with it yet, but I basically went all in on the Kickstarter, so I have pretty much everything for Hate. And then another game that came out that I really enjoyed because it also it hits that post-apocalyptic checkbox. Cars, which I love, and that's Gaslands. So if you like Mad Max, post-apocalyptic setting, getting a chance to customize Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars, I intend to do a lot of content for Gaslands. In fact, Gaslands and arguably Warcry, which I'll talk about here in a second, will be the two games that I focus on the most in the beginning for the channel. But Gaslands specifically, I'm really excited about. It's embarrassing, but probably every time I've gone to the grocery store for almost the last 2 years since it came out, I've probably bought a car here or a car there. So now I have like 5 bins worth of Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars, which, brief tangent, if you subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, you'll probably see some updates and announcements in the future about how on my Twitch channel, which maybe follow me there as well for announcements and notifications, I'll be doing some giveaways because frankly, I have so many cars for Gaslands that I'll probably be doing some giveaways for Gaslands and possibly even some giveaways for some of the other games where maybe I kind of went a little overboard on buying some armies and war bands, etc. Mostly because, as many of you know, it's not so much a fear of missing out, but especially for Games Workshop with these small box specialty games, if you don't buy some of these things when they first come out, you may not get at least all the components for that faction. They sell out and they're hard to find. You have to go to eBay or maybe you can find a digital version, but I'm old school. I'm not a huge fan of having everything on a tablet. I like to have the cards to go along with the miniatures, maybe even the dice. It's a sickness. It is what it is. But that's why I bought a lot of the content, not quite knowing for sure what I would be playing. And as I start painting and playing the games more consistently, I'll probably kind of weed out maybe some of the factions I just don't want to play or have time to play. So stay tuned for announcements for potential giveaways for some of that content, especially cars for Gaslands. So those are, I think that's everything. I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing anything. So a brief summary: Guild Ball from Steamforge, Shadow War Armageddon. While I bought into it, probably won't do a whole lot of content, but those models that I bought for that, specifically like the Gene Stealer cult, will transition over into Kill Team content, as well as Necromunda content. I didn't talk about this too much, but Warhammer Underworlds, Shadespire, but then there's Night Vault, and then there's Beastgrave. So Warhammer Underworlds specifically, because of the cards, because of the miniatures, I can't not have content for that. And because they just released a digital version of that online on Steam, you may see me stream some of that on Twitch as well here in the near future. But then obviously Warcry, which I haven't spoken too much about that, but I will. Gaslands, Hate, Blackstone Fortress, may not have so much gameplay featured on that, but the models, again, because they can be used for Kill Team, and then Blood Bowl. So I believe it's 8 or 9 games that I intend to focus on the channel. As time goes on, I'll probably kind of segment out those games into their own little unique title, if you will. So for example, like Gaslands, I'm tentatively thinking muscle cars, mohawks, and machine guns for that series. And I'll probably have some other names. Like I'm leaning towards, if I do 9th edition Warhammer 40k, I'll probably call that series Danger Zone, just as a joke to the fact that the new logo looks like the Top Gun logo. It is what it is. But I look for little things like that because I find them funny, and it kind of inspires me to stay focused on the content I want to focus on a given time. So those are the games. And as I said, Warcry and Gaslands definitely will probably be the two I focus on the most. Arguably Kill Team early on. Warcry is interesting because when it was originally announced, it was supposed to just be these Chaos Warbands. And early on, I've heard a lot of rumors and speculations as to why they expanded beyond the initial or original Chaos Warbands. But for me, I felt that Warcry was kind of a reaction to Hate. And it was probably developed maybe even before Hate, but it had the look of it. Artistically, the design, the graphic design of the boxes, all the imagery, it felt very much like Hate to me. And I don't know if that was the reason. That was what I thought initially, was that it looked so close to Hate. And then I think GW being GW, they saw the potential to sell more models from their other lines as a way of getting you into their bigger games. So for example, with Warcry, it's based in the Age of Sigmar setting. So it seemed like a natural transition to Hate, comparisons aside, to introduce the war bands, the factions from Age of Sigmar into that Warcry world. So it went from just being the original Chaos war bands to including all the war bands from Age of Sigmar. So I don't know if I'll ever get into Age of Sigmar. I feel like Warcry is going to be enough for me. Again, I want to stay in that skirmish-based size of games that play within 45 minutes to an hour, and that give me the opportunity to work on different factions without the commitment of having to paint, not necessarily hundreds, but a large amount of models just to field one army. Being able to paint 5 to maybe 12 miniatures, maybe a little bit more depending on the point size of those individual warbands. That really appeals to me. So those are the games I intend to feature on the channel. I just want to say thank you for stopping by and checking out this episode. Hope you, again, click that subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. And be safe and have a great day. Bye-bye.